Hello, I'm Dapper Dan Gavosdin, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals, which definitely count.
And I'm Mischievous Mark Ginocchio, and I, too, own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals. But Dan, from the way I see things, which is usually the right way of seeing things, I don't believe the annuals count.
Well, I feel like I'm in a fog about everything because I think if the listeners listen closely, we both are suffering colds right now.
There
But
we
here
go.
we are. We're podcasting, so excuse our phlegm or snot or whatever.
It's the Frogman Toadman show. Let's do it,
That's
guys.
it. Yeah. So anyway, welcome everybody to the Amazing Spider Talk, the show where two fans and collectors uncover the strange, fun, and fascinating history of the Spider-Man comic universe. Thanks for joining us for this review episode of the Amazing Spider Talk.
If you want to swing along with us on our journey through Spidey's past, present, and future, subscribe to Amazing Spider Talk on your favorite podcast app and leave us a review to help spread the word about our show.
This podcast exists because of the support of our Patreon members. If you want to receive early episodes, exclusive artwork, and keep this podcast going, go to AmazingSpiderTalk.com and click on the big Patreon button and then consider signing up. There's a lot of awesome things that we're doing. But today on the show, Mark and I are going to be discussing Amazing Spider-Man Volume 6, number 31, this mega-sized issue, because it's actually issue 925, and 25th issues are now a thing, Mark. Well, I say now. It's been going for some time now. But,
Right.
yeah, this issue is written by Zeb Wells. The cover artwork is by John Romita Jr., Scott Hanna, and Marcio Menyz. The interior pencils are also by John Romita Jr. and Emilio Laiso with Zé Carlos. Inks by Scott Hanna and Emilio Laiso with Zé Carlos. Covers by Marcio Menyz and Bryan Valenza. And, of course, letters by VC's Joe Caramanga. This story also features multiple backup stories featuring work from additional creatives David Lopez, KJ Diaz, Mark Bagley, John Dell, Edgar Delgado, Celeste Bronfman, Alba Glez, Elisabetta D'Amico, Craig Yeung, Jim Campbell, Dan Slott, Paco Medina, Erick Arciniega, Albert Monteys, Cale Atkinson, Patrick Gleason, Steve Foxe, Carola Borelli, and Caare Andrews. This issue was first released on August 9th, 2023. I feel like I did pretty good there. I probably butchered 3 or 4 names. But, Mark, we got a lot to talk about on this, so let's get right to your recap.
Yeah, lucky us, Dan. We're both feeling under the weather, and we have the longest issue in quite some time to talk about. So let's do it. Our presence is requested. Ooh, who's their calligrapher? We're at Arthur Avenue in the Bronx, and boy, I could go for some fried calamar and gabagool right now. White Rabbit makes a Bugs Bunny reference, and Tombstone, the boss, walks in. He announces to the collected criminals in the room that his baby daughter is marrying a square, and yet none of them have bothered to RSVP. Typical New York wedding guest list with these RSVPs. Anyway, Hammerhead thinks it's not a good idea for all of them to attend, mainly because the Kingpin is on his way back out, and perhaps having every underworld character in one spot is a bad idea, especially since Fist's son, the Rose, was busted up by Spider-Man a few months ago. Tombstone likes to live on the edge and demands their presence anyway. What a father of the bridezilla, Dan. The crooks agree, and Hammerhead tells them to learn the electric slide, which, true story, was on my no playlist under any circumstances at my wedding back in the day. That and the chicken dance and YMCA. Do not play.
Fair enough.
So now we fast forward to the bachelorette party, and some of New York's finest Karens want to know why their RSVP table isn't available at the club. As it turns out, they've been bumped by Janice Lincoln and her party of supervillains, and really, who among us? Janice's law school friend Michelle is the typical square of the group, but these girls are ready to party. Meanwhile, Peter and Randy are off in Atlantic City in the world's saddest looking diner, and I'm half expecting De Niro to come in with Charles Grodin with 39 cents to their names. Back to the ladies, the party goes up another level with the arrival of Felicia, and the girls have a mixed reaction to the world-famous Spider-Man sidekick showing up. Michelle and White Rabbit have some snippy words, and that brings us back to Peter and Randy. and it sounds like no one Peter was supposed to invite to this soiree could make it, and Randy's getting suspicious. Back to the girls, and they're about to get their supervillain costumes. And again, back to the boys, and Randy thinks Peter pulled a Peter here and forgot to invite people or invited them at the last minute, and really, who could blame him? Peter has been spending way too much time with his best friend Norman Osborn, mourning the loss of Kamala Khan, a character so vital to Amazing Spider-Man continuity, I'm almost remiss in not mentioning it here.
How long is that joke going to go on for?
As long as I say so, Dan. Back to the girls, and they're looking pretty trashed, but Janice and Felicia are aware enough to share a moment where Janice mentions part of what makes her so devoted to Randy is his commitment to wanting her to quit crime. Felicia gets a look in her eye, and that can't be a good look for her future prospects with someone that we know, right, Dan? Oof. Speaking of which, Peter and Randy are hanging out at a carousel, and good thing this isn't the Central Park carousel, or Frank Castle might have some wicked flashbacks and ruin Randy's bachelor party. Randy has a heart-to-heart with Peter, and he realizes Peter actually didn't screw up. His friends didn't show up because he's marrying a supervillain. Is this a redemption story for Peter? Talk about a backtrack. Send it to Tom Brevoort, Dan. Randy and Peter have a special moment and bro out before deciding that riding the carousel is a big no, but somewhere off panel, these two bros are riding that thing and we'd love to see it. So Peter quietly walks away and is confronted by Felicia, and they start to have the talk. Peter talks about not being a barrel of laughs lately, and it sounds like someone is listening to my criticism on this show. Anyway, Felicia asks him about why he doesn't try stopping her from committing crimes anymore, and he doesn't have a good answer beyond them going through the motions. Well, that's something you don't want to admit to someone you're dating, and indeed, they break up. And if Mary Jane isn't waiting for him on the next page, the internet riots. Alas, a riot has commenced. Instead, it's just Randy getting jumped by Janice, and they decide to have some fun before we fast forward to the big day. And it's a who's who of the Spider-Man universe. Aunt May, Betty Brant and her demon spawn, and Hammerhead. And Hammerhead gives Peter a tip to cover his cheap tux rental, and then the rest of the motley crew shows up, and Peter understands it's not going to be a boring day. Robbie visits with Randy to give him some comfort. Some southern comfort, right? Actually, who knows what's in the flask, but man, that's a great move, Robbie. Great move. Peter's spider sense is going off, but the ceremony starts, and naturally, Shotgun, an uninvited guest, shows up, and I'm really racking my brain to place this character. Dan, explain it to me, buddy.
Well, Shotgun is a character we haven't seen in I believe, almost 30 years, at least in the Spider-Man world. I think he's a Captain America villain first and foremost, but he showed up most prominently in the Tom DeFalco, John Romita Jr. Spider Hunt story from the 90s. So, you know, if you have any fondness for Spider Hunt, which is, I think, one of those stories that kind of got lost in the midst of, like, the end of the 90s kind of mess of Spider-Man comics. But, you know, it's a Tom DeFalco story, and it's got JR art, and I got to think maybe JR had some fondness for Shotgun and thought, you know, like maybe they could reincorporate him here or something. It's a character that didn't immediately spring to my mind, I will admit.
Gotcha. Well, you know, Dan, maybe if you had checked the solicits like you usually do, you would have saw that one coming. But anyway, Tombstone cockily stands up to Shotgun thinking he's bulletproof, but oops. Looks like those bullets pierced his skin. Spider-Man shows up to save Tombstone just in time, and now all hell is breaking loose. Madame Mask goes into a limo that Hammerhead conveniently blows up. While Spider-Man continues to fight Shotgun, Shotgun makes his escape by motorcycle and basically disappears into thin air, which brings us to a somber epilogue where Randy and Janice go their separate ways, and Peter reminds himself he can't make a mistake like letting his friend marry a criminal ever again. But also in this comic, Dan, as you alluded to in the intro, we got some short stories involving the resurrection of Kamala Khan, which I still won't bother to understand. We got a teaser for the new Superior Spider-Man story with Otto Octavius. We get the setup for Mary Jane becoming Jackpot, and also some visuals of her sharing a bed with Paul, just to make the internet truly melt down. It looks like we're getting a new Spider-Woman series that involves her trying to reunite with her baby while she was killed off for a bit by Dan Slott in his Spider-Man book. We also get a teaser for Spider-Boy. We got a couple of inventory stories about a crazed Spider-Man fan and stalker and ducks. The Queen Goblin and Kraven are fighting and then doing other stuff with each other. And then, Lord have mercy on our souls, I'm not even going to entertain the last image of this book, Dan, with a description. And that's my recap.
Awesome, Mark. That was, I mean, look, it's a $10 book, and that was a $10 recap. So, I think that rivals me walking everybody through the ramifications of Kindred for length of explanation. So, you guys should be all up on things here. So I want to talk, about this issue 925 or volume 631, kind of overall. It's a $10 issue, a 25th issue. This has become a trend for this book. It's kind of like a yearly check-in, or like really what it reminds me of is kind of like a digest or almost like a previews mag. In a way, it's like, here's what's going on with the Spider-Man line. We're wrapping up a year on this creator's run because a year is about 25 comics, and they tend to time these things out that way. So, I think they are kind of establishing this new format for Spider-Man comics. What do you think about the $10 book? And then I guess I would ask you, what do you think about this $10 book?
Oh, well, okay. I think those are two very distinct questions. I mean, I think to this point, frankly, I've kind of felt the $10 book was a bit of a cash grab, because what you described about what those books are, I felt was the case for this book, but isn't always the case for the other book. Or maybe it is, but maybe not as amplified as this one is. I mean, that's the thing. Let me start by your second question. I thought this was, for a $10 book, about as much value as you could ask for. I mean, we got a very entertaining, full-length main story, and then all of the B stories, if you will, were all previewing, I would think, major storylines and new series and mini-series that we're going to get that have already been hyped. Superior, the Spider-Boy. I mean, not that I necessarily want to see a Spider-Boy series, but we know it's coming, and it's good to get a teaser in here. I didn't realize that Jessica Drew was coming back with perhaps her own book, or at least she's going to be featured in something at some point. Even the true inventory stories had a little bit of appeal to them. There was some fun to it. They were kind of harmless, annual backup type stories. There was just a lot of creator value here. A lot of good people worked on this book throughout, start to finish. It wasn't just the A crew on the main story and then just 30 people you've never heard of before doing the rest of the book. I mean, if this is what Marvel is truly committed to doing with these books, I can justify sucking it up and buying the $10. They actually have one of the 1 in 2 variants at my LCS. I thought it was the I guess the George Perez cover, and I really like that, so I grabbed that one. Can't go wrong with George Perez. So this is what they want to do. It's great. If they're gonna do I'm thinking back to during Last Remains or whatever, they did a jumbo one, and that just didn't feel like it landed the way this one did in terms of offering up what's on the horizon, not just in ASM, but all throughout the line.
Yeah, I don't think that the line comes across as particularly cohesive in this issue. It's a little all over the place, which I think is fine. You get stuff like Spider-Man Reign, the book that won't say its name. Or Mark won't dare say its name. Right. That's not even a 616 story, so it does feel really kind of thrown in at the end here, and I'm not complaining because I'm really looking forward to that book, and I think, they've had, Caare Andrews doing stuff in Amazing Spider-Man, and, I think it was a way to reintroduce him to, Spider-Man audiences so that they could ultimately announce this thing and build up the hype for it. And so, like, I'm not particularly upset about it feeling disjointed because I did feel like every story was fun to read. And I know ultimately, like, a lot of these are going to dovetail. We've got Gang War coming up. The main story set that up. I know Spider-Woman's book is going to launch out of that. It requires a little bit of me knowing stuff. But, like, every story was, beautifully illustrated, well-written, and entertaining to read. And that's not always the case for these. I like the presentation of it too. You get these books with the nice spine. I felt like in terms of production quality, we've dinged this book, in the past for, having coloring errors and stuff. And there's some things here, like there's a whole scene where Peter has blue eyes. And it's like, no, Peter doesn't have blue eyes. But like that is much smaller than anything we've dinged it for in the past. And so I think the overall quality of how this was assembled was really, really solid.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. I guess, as you were talking, I was almost thinking to myself, like, this felt like an issue 1, but the comic historian in me appreciates that, rather than just reboot the whole series and do a volume 7, we got a 25 instead. Whatever. Yeah. I'm picking nits here, but it is what it is.
I mean, it's really the kickoff to year 2 on Zeb's run. And my overall feeling about this book, and we'll get into the details, is I think that he took a lot of the criticisms I've had of year 1 on his title, and he either brings them to an end or pushes them in a new direction that kind of course corrects stuff that I didn't really dig in the first year. Now, whether that ends up being good is to be seen, but this kind of felt like a number 1 in that it was no, this is the new landing point for where the book is going to focus. And I really feel like it was on much more solid ground. As much as I've loved his first elements of his first year, this felt much more confident as a leading book of this line of books. I do still think it's weird that Dan Slott is here doing whatever it is he's doing in the back of this book. I don't really think it threatens Zeb's run in any way, but it does feel focused on something entirely different than what Zeb is interested in doing. And maybe that's a good thing, but it is weird. Even the writing style feels much more old school. And so it creates this kind of weird, almost tonal dissonance. But I really overall really enjoyed this story.
I mean, to be totally frank, Dan, I think and this goes back to your earlier point about the cohesiveness of everything here. But I think given the amount of content that seems to be slated to be coming down the pipeline here, I think if all these things did intricately tie together in a significant way, well, yeah, that would be the more artful thing to be doing. But from just a sheer consumer standpoint, I don't know if I could take that. That kind of brings me back to, early mid 90s with the Clone Saga and even Maximum Carnage and stuff like that, where it was just if you wanted to keep up with what was happening in the Spider-Man, you just had to consume everything and consume it in real time. And we're super fans, so we buy the bulk of this stuff anyway. But I got to be honest, the only book I truly read day 1 is ASM, and everything else, I get to when I get to, and sometimes I read it within a few days, sometimes I read it within a few weeks, sometimes I read it within a few months, and that's fine, because it's all kind of operating independently of each other, and I can enjoy it when I need to enjoy it. So there you go.
I do find it curious that, I think the only time that it's ever really worked with everything under the same umbrella operating that way is, during the Superior era. And that's because that really allowed people to play with the high concept of it. The team up books were just evil Spider-Man teaming up with someone, right? And it felt inherently cohesive in that way. what I thought was interesting is, what had made the first year cohesive on this title was like even like the Red Goblin book and like Misery and all these books that like I had no anticipation for picking up have found themselves cohesively tying into the Norman Osborn story, who doesn't appear in this book at all. And I thought that was interesting. And, Solicits might have us believe that might be coming to an end relatively soon. But I did find it interesting that we didn't really get much of Norman Osborn here. The last thing I want to ask you about before we get into like specific elements of the book is we've had a lot of wedding issues in the past, or even like, like hopeful wedding issues, whether it be like Betty Brant, and Ned Leeds,
Mirage.
or Peter and Mary Jane. Yeah. Is this the best wedding issue? Because I kind of think it is.
You're gonna laugh at me, but no, I think the best wedding issue is Annual 21, and that's where I come from. But like, I both. Talk about a double knock here. It's both an annual and it's Peter and MJ, and I'm so anti-marriage of the two of them, right, Dan? So, but no, I think that was, in terms of fan service, the ultimate payoff. But I would say, like, of the non-titular character, this is the best wedding issue to appear in ASM.
Yeah, I think it's less like cohesive as its own thing than like, say, like Amazing Spider-Man 600, but like I kind of think this one really nailed the like wedding vibe. So let's get into that. This book, it doesn't open with it, but the bulk of it is these two dueling, bachelor and bachelorette parties. What'd you think of these stories?
I actually would love to start with the bachelor party, because like this was, to go back to the first arc of the Zeb Wells run, where, the AKA the famous swerve with, Peter and the Rose and Tombstone, like the bachelor party, the way this was all being set up, like I got to be honest, as I'm reading this page by page and we see it unfolding, and it just seems abundantly clear Peter messed up again, and like there was a part of me that was just like, oh God, like, are we gonna do that like another year?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like can we please have the main character of this book be someone that I want to root for, and not be just, like, we understand why Peter always lets these people down. I know that's part of his story, but like it just felt like it's been since the beginning of last year, really piling on. And Zeb completely pulled the rug out from under us and was like, actually, no, Peter did the right thing here. And it was just Randy's friends that kind of like flaked out. And like when that swerve became revealed, like everything about this book really started to click for me. And when I went back and reread it, I enjoyed the other stuff with Janice and the bachelorette party and some of the other setups a lot more, because like I was less guarded, because I knew like, okay, they're letting Peter be okay here,
Yeah.
And so I not to jump around sequentially, but I felt like that was just important to get out front, that once that little literary trick was revealed, frankly, it just like elevated the book significantly for me, or this story specifically was elevated a lot for me, and I was very impressed with how Wells was kind of playing with what our expectations were going to be.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that too. And it's funny, not to bring Twitter into this, but like there were a number of people like posting the image of Peter, like saying how much he screwed up, without any context, being like, look at how they're making Peter look like a miserable, wimp. And it's like, no, like that's the whole idea, because he's going to subvert it. Like way to tell on yourself for not reading the comic. Yeah, but I thought I liked all of that. I love the little details too. Whether it's the reference back to the cheese that's living in their fridge, from the Jenkins run. or the like reference to Josh Kittling. It's just the first time we've heard of Josh Kittling in 50 years.
Right.
From the Crisis on Campus issues, I believe. I thought the art here was really stellar. Like just the way it was cinematically arranged, close-ups, the glow of the carousel. But I have one big problem with this, Mark.
Yeah.
And you might tell me it's silly, but almost 400 issues ago, we had the exact same story in a Spider-Man comic, and not an obscure Spider-Man comic. I'm talking about Amazing Spider-Man 583, probably the most read modern Spider-Man comic, because it's the Obama issue. And if you don't remember that story, in that story, Peter is assigned to throw a birthday party for Betty Brant.
Right.
And he shows up, and no one else shows up, and Betty unloads on him and he takes it until it's ultimately revealed, no, he did reach out to everybody, and he did plan this party, but Betty had so trashed her relationships that nobody wanted to show up. And it's beat for beat identical to this story. And, you know, Zeb, who was a part of the Brand New Day Trust at the time when that comic, it's like, I can't say that he's recycling this story, this Mark Waid story.
Right.
But it's so similar. And granted, it was almost 400 issues ago, you know.
15 years. I mean,
yeah. So like maybe like I'm the only one that remembers it, but it was a really big million-selling comic, you know. It's just like you know, if I read this, if this was proposed to me, I would probably have immediately flagged like, "Hey, we already did a story like that." And maybe I'm being too sensitive to it. You know, we can repeat stories and stuff. And it still worked for me on the page here. But the whole time I was reading it, I was like, haven't I already read this story before?
Right.
And I mean, I don't know. Maybe my history is doing me in, you know?
I mean, I was going to say, I mean, like, you know, don't get me wrong. I mean, like, I can be quite a stickler and a nerd about history and continuity. And, like, until you just brought it up, it got lost. I didn't feel it as much, and I think I'll defend it or no prize it or however you want to say it on a couple of levels. I mean, one, the first thing, 15 years ago is a long time ago. I mean, whether we want to admit it or not. I mean, it's only +5 for our podcast, Dan. But but you know, like in terms of generations of readers, like, you know, like there are people reading this book right now that weren't even born when that story came out. So, you know, this just sit on that for a second.
Cringe.
I know. I'm sorry. How about this? They weren't reading yet when that story came out.
Okay, fair. That makes me feel a little bit better. Yeah.
Okay, there you go. But like on top of that, like I would say the primary difference was this storyline was a piece of a larger narrative that was going on that was really like, I mean, yes, it was kind of just bouncing back and forth between these two parties, but like that Betty Brant birthday party was that was the, you know, the focus of that story. That was the focus of the A story. And there was just a lot happening. So like, yeah, it'd be nice if you could just kind of come up with a more original premise. But like, I feel like you can probably be a little sneakier about it when you're doing it in the context of lots of other things. You know, you had the meeting of the bosses or the made men or whatever you want to call it, and you had Janice and her stuff, and you kind of had Felicia and Peter and what's happening there, and it could distract you from the fact that you were kind of getting a side story beat for beat with something we've gotten 15 years earlier. So that's all I'll say to that.
And I'll say, like, I think the execution on it is way better here than it was in that comic, which is a comic I actually really like. You know, it's known for the Obama thing, but it's got, you know, it had that other the main cover was like the Romita cover. Like it was a pretty, you know, wonderful issue in its own right. But this, you know, I think you're leading me to the next thing that I loved about this opening and this first half of the book is just the thought that went into designing this comic to be a comic. I thought
Right.
was wonderful. Like all of the page turns were great. You know, the flipping back and forth between these two groups and the like setup of like, man, I bet, you know, Randy's burning down the house. Turn the page there, you know, as
Right.
lame as you expect it, you know? So like you can do that in filmmaking, like in a cut, you know, right?
Yes,
Like,
yes.
but like there is something uniquely comic book about this story that I really loved, pinging between these two, you know, art styles and color changes and the way the pages were laid out. Like, I just thought this was a beautifully told story overall. So, you know, whether or not it was rehashed, it's only in hindsight that I was like, wait a minute, that's the exact story we got. Because while I was reading it, I was very enthralled in what was going on. So let's talk about the bachelorette party. You said
Yeah.
it like worked better for you on a second read.
Yeah, well, I think because of the way the story was kind of ping-ponging, like I felt more guarded on it on the first read because I was waiting for Peter's screw up to fully capsize, and once I kind of knew that wasn't going to be the case, I guess I wasn't thinking of Amazing Spider-Man 583. I kind of went back and found it was, you know, to go back to, you know, one of my classic criticisms from a few months ago on this show, Dan, where's the joy? I mean, those sequences were filled with joy, you know, like it was just silly and fun, but not like nothing about it felt too goofy. I mean, there were certainly some jokes in the B stories that we can maybe discuss later in terms of maybe not being the best landed jokes, but like I felt like, you know, in addition to just how, as you just mentioned, the book was set up to be funny and how it sequenced and progressed. Like they're just like, you know, some good lines and visual gags here. You know, Lady Octopus is kind of just out in the open being her fun self. You know, we
Yeah.
get an appearance from Kareem here, dropping a couple of lines. I mean, like it's fun stuff, and you know, the joke from White Rabbit to Michelle about like what I don't trust anything that goes to school for 8 years or something like that. I
It
mean,
doesn't
you know,
die. Yeah, I thought
yeah,
that was
yeah.
funny. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they're just some good one-liners, some good visual gags, some good sequential art sequencing, all led to a lot of joyful reading, which of course would set up the dramatic turn of the second half of the book. But this was fun stuff. I don't know how else I can articulate it beyond that. It was just fun stuff. This is the kind of fun stuff I like in comics.
Yeah, and you know, I don't know what the division of the art was on this. Like Emilio Laiso is credited, you know, in this, but so is like Zay Carlos. So I don't know who is. Their styles are very similar. I think Zay Carlos did the Peter and Randy story, and Emilio Laiso did this one. And I loved the art in this. I thought it was really fun and playful. You said a lot of good like physical humor. The page turn of like the group of Karens getting thrown behind Lady Octopus was really funny, and her like superiority complex, just like any octopus character, was great. But I really loved the designs of their like pre-costume outfits, like how they incorporate a little bit of Electro's electricity into the dress. Just
Right.
a visually really fun thing. And then, you know, on Zeb, I thought, what a brilliant way to bring Peter and Felicia back into this and have like the mirror setup of Randy and Janice's relationship, you know, between like, you know, a normie and, you know, this supervillain, you know, mirroring Peter and Felicia's relationship. Like, that's a observation from a writing level that I did not see like coming, and found actually really clever and thoughtful. Now, how, you know, I'm curious to hear what you think about the breakup. So moving on from these parties, you know, we leave. Felicia has this kind of moment of realization and goes to meet Peter outside of his apartment. And they kind of, like you said in intro, suggests that they're going through the motions. And
Right.
I've seen some criticism of this scene. I'm curious to hear what you thought about it.
Well, I'll preface this by saying, and look, if you're amazing Spider Talk long timer here, you can get your bingo card out or your drinking game going. I kind of felt from the first place that this relationship was kind of attached like with a rivet gun to this book. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it was just like what is this? Oh, okay, there to get. I mean, we had MJ and Paul, so like naturally we have to pair Peter with somebody, and let's give him back to Felicia. And like, not for nothing, I think this was Zeb. I remember emailing or talking to somebody for the 100th Thing Spider-Man book, and he was kind of like, oh, it's always more fun when Peter and Black Cat are together. So either way, like whatever that quote was, like all those years ago when they started dating again, I was like, oh, so that's where this is coming from. It's like this, like, oh, let's give this one more go, and it's like, meh, like it didn't work in the first place. Like for me, like it felt like it was going through the motions. I mean, the infamous two-parter in the at the ski lodge or whatever is still like in terms of, and I know that wasn't Zeb, that was Joe Kelly, but like that was some of the most bizarrely written comic books that we've read in the last few years, just in terms of the description of that relationship. So I don't know if this is a course correction necessarily, but like this was never written like it was gonna go anywhere anyway. And it was always written, like I don't know if this is some kind of response to fans about MJ being with Paul and thus, trying to soften the blow and then maybe just not caring anymore about that, or again, they just wanted to toy with something for a few issues, and now that we're past the dead language arc, we can just move on from it. I don't know, but either way, like, yes, I do think it's a good parallel how they set it up and got into it. It made, it's probably the most thoughtful thing that they've done about this pairing since they've gotten back together. But like, I'm not sitting here being like, oh no, what am I going to do without this? Because like this relationship kind of meant nothing to me for the last few months, if I'm being completely blunt here.
Yeah, I honestly think that this scene takes the meta conversation around this book, which is like, what are we doing? And puts it into the text, whether that was intended all along, like, or not, like it could have been handled better. Like the obvious thing is it's like Peter trying to move on from MJ and falling back into kind of old patterns. And like, I believe that. I would believe that, but I feel like the kind of scrambled nature of the reveal of the first year and the timeline there being all out of order, really did not set us up to understand Peter's mindset. And like rereading the first 26 issues, I think it does make a lot more sense, like what's going on in Peter's mind after this devastating blow of finding out that MJ is with somebody else, and he needs to find someone, but it's not written that way. And so for me, this scene was like about as good as you could do to kind of wrap this up and acknowledge, one, it's not working, whether but in the context of the story and as a reader, and that like to kind of recontextualize what we saw before, which is like Felicia was a rebound, and she does not want to be a rebound. She wants a relationship, and that's consistent for the character. So I thought it was a well-written scene, even if the lead up to it didn't really like sell us on this relationship. At least it's like, hey, I'm going to undo this, and I'll make it into a strength rather than a weakness. And, I respect any writer that like can see something not working and try to make something good out of it, And so in the context of this issue, I thought it worked.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the big day here. We're back to JR on pencils here. We have Peter kind of awkwardly ushering and getting mocked by Hammerhead for his cheap tux, which is, classic Peter.
Yeah.
And like as this is all unfolding, the spider sense going off, like you just like, look, it's like the classic comedy. You bring out a big giant sized birthday cake and someone's either jumping out or going into it. It's like you have a wedding in a superhero comic book. All hell's gonna break loose. It's just how it's gonna happen. So like you're just sitting there. I'm sitting here this whole sequence like, when's it gonna happen? When's it gonna happen? I mean, how is your mood throughout this?
Well, it's almost daring you to like lean back into your like old tropes about like comic book marriages, right? Like it's never been this stacked, and so like you get the moment of Peter being like, oh, like all of that melted away, and there's just Janice and Randy, and they're in love, and part of me was like, they might actually do this. Like, it might be a piece. Like, I know it's not going to be, but like, like it was. I felt like the comic was like daring me to disbelieve that they would do a big brawl, at the wedding. And of course, it's going to go down when you get all those people there. But the setup was really funny. I thought the kind of prelude scene of them with Tombstone was pretty effective. In kind of establishing the stakes and what they know about his kind of rule over all these other gang lords. I mean, the Randy and Robbie scene was appropriately touching and a like light enough touch, although it makes me doubt Robbie's judgment in that he trusts Randy's judgment of women, because like, has anybody ever had like more bad luck with women than Randy? I mean... Yeah,
I don't know. I mean, what about the one who left his love of his life in a dimension where time sped up? I mean, that's pretty bad luck.
That's fair. That's fair.
Anyway, no. Yeah, but like it was, dare I say, a little cliched, but also like the right kind of cliche that I would expect from the Robertson family. You know what I mean? Like, of course, he's like, hey, and I'm a cool guy too because I'm giving you a little booze from my flask, and it was like I said, it made me smile, even if it was just kind of like, I don't want to say expected, but just like, oh, of course, like you said, everything is being set up, and like you're thinking, maybe they're just gonna do it. And this was like definitely one of those moments like, maybe they're just gonna do it, but if not, this would be the kind of moment that they would have before they wouldn't do it. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So,
I love any scene where Peter gets to interact with the Spider-Man cast. Or like villains, but as Peter, and they don't recognize him. We got that in like issue 1 of this run, where Peter gets into the limo with Tombstone, and like I love that like we can still have fun with the secret identity in 2023. As so few characters still have that. I mean, this was exactly what I wanted, and I've kind of wanted from this book in a while, which is like a really nice balance. I mean, Spider-Man is barely in this title, this is a Peter dominant book, and I really appreciated all of that. We got this new character, Michelle, that was introduced in the Bachelorette Party, and like they go out of their way to like introduce her to Peter in some way, which makes me think like new supporting cast character in some way, because why spend that page on that? And it seems to me from JRJR's art that that she's actually Asian, which is a nice change of things. Like the last Asian cast member that we got was Shashan, who I don't really think is the best representation for Asian characters ever. People have been speculating, like, is this a new love interest? I honestly think it's too early, and really that's probably a condemnation of like the title overall, that we can't introduce a female character and have her not be a potential love interest for Peter. But like for a character that could have disappeared after the Bachelorette thing, it was interesting that like they brought her back. I don't know if there's anything to speculate about it, but it is interesting that this new character has suddenly showed up.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I gotta be honest. I didn't think too much about the Peter and Michelle interaction, but like, I guess it's better than the last Michelle he was with, right?
Yeah. I had to make sure it wasn't that Michelle.
Well, I had that moment too. I was like, wait, is this? No, it's not. So then, of course, as everyone predicted, a double or was it? I'm trying to remember. It was double page
It's
splash,
just
right?
a single page
Oh, okay,
splash.
okay.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember my vertical versus horizontal here. Anyway, shotgun. As you so wonderfully detailed in our recap, from the Spider Hunt era. I actually shared that comic on my Instagram feed recently, and not even realizing I was being like current about it. Honestly, I just grabbed it and was like, "Oh, this is a fun one I haven't talked about." Um, so, yeah, I was kind of a little confused by the mechanics of the bullets and like why are these going through? I don't know. There's a lot happening here, and it was all really riveting, fun stuff. But like, I feel like you're gonna just go to town with speculation here. So maybe I should just turn the mic over to you about what's happening here, Dan, because like
Yeah,
this
I
is the
don't
kind
know
of
that I'm going to go to town. I mean, really, this is the kickoff to gang war, and there's going to be a
right,
ton of different parties with all vying for their own interests, and I think you kind of see that play out here, which is like, you know, this could be all one orchestrated hit on Tombstone, but the more likely thing seems to be like all these different people all had their own individual plans, to enact during this thing. As for the shotgun like appearance, I really loved the page before he appears, where it's like this solemn moment of like Tombstone handing, this firm grip on Janice's arm, handing her over to Randy. Intercut with Peter's spider sense, and then the splash page. I thought it was a really effective reveal. But I thought the action with shotgun was a blast. The Peter making fun of like being the HR representative and his new boss was
right,
really funny. As for like the special bullets and all that stuff, like that pierced Tombstone skin, like to me it just seems like it was an orchestrated hit on Tombstone. And Shotgun says as much. Like, you thought you had all the cards, but one person can't see everything. And this was some organized hit. We see it later when Shotgun just flat out disappears on a
right.
motorcycle. So someone was there to pick him up. The most interesting thing is that like he refers to like a big boss or whatever. And earlier in the book they tease like Kingpin coming back into town. But I don't really think that that's what's happening, given that like Kingpin has a prominent place in the X books right now because he's
Right.
living on Krakoa.
Like you do.
What the thing that I was most interested in is Hammerhead's mysterious date.
Right.
Because like they make a big point of like, what's your name? And he's like, she doesn't have a name, and like maybe she's just like a prostitute, but like I don't
Yeah.
think so. Like
Yeah, no.
when he puts her in the car and says like, I told you I'd show you a good time, like
Right.
my immediate suspicions is like that's the big boss. Like
Right.
she's just incognito, and she's pulling the strings in some way. Who that is, I don't know. Like if I were to have to guess, like based off this issue, I do find it curious that Madame Mask was just like unceremoniously, yeah, just blown up in a car, and like that's an easy thing to fake. Some person with a mask on, you put some other body in the car, and Madame Mask gets to fake her death.
Right.
I don't know if she could, like the state of her current face, that she could walk around with just shades on and not be identifiable as like someone with a really messed up face. But like that would be the kind of switcheroo that I could see Zeb writing in here. Carlos in the Slack posited the theory that it's like Felicia working undercover, but that's too much of a quick turnaround for me.
Right.
Like to
Yeah.
see her do that, and I don't think it's motivated by like her breaking up with Peter. Those seems unrelated. So, but my theory right now is like whoever this big boss is, it's this woman that's Hammerhead's date. Does that track for you, Mark?
Or it's connected. I mean, like, the fact of the matter is, like, Shotgun basically, like, disappeared, which leads me to believe that whoever is kind of pulling all the strings here might have some semblance of powers.
Yeah, or
Or
like a car that's like off site that he got his bike in or something like that. I don't know.
yeah, but I mean, like, I don't know. Like, I got my read of it was like it was just kind of like a thin air disappearance. I mean, it wasn't.
Yeah.
And I like your theory, frankly, about Madame Mask, but like to that point, like, could this whoever this person be, like, create some kind of cloaking thing for her face or something? You know what I mean? Like, it's just there's a lot that could be happening here, and maybe it's the same one and the same, or maybe it's something else that pulling the strings. So we'll wait and see. Lord knows I'm always great at making predictions on this book.
Hey, you guessed who Kindred was, even if it didn't seem like that big of a reach.
Right. I was still ultimately wrong, I think. But anyway,
I guess. Who knows?
Let's not do it.
My only real ding for this story, this main story overall, other than like the issue 583 thing, is that like as a chapter, I still think it feels a little bit incomplete. Like the Randy Janice kind of like ending where they're kind of on opposite sides of this like gang war or whatever you want to call it. Like their wedding is called off. Like I get why like he kind of put faith in her to not have her family screw this up for him.
Right.
But it does seem a little cold, and I feel like as a reader, I didn't really understand fully why the characters abandon each other in that final moment in the comic. And I feel like if you were going to end this chapter on like a solid note, like that would have been a nice way to end it. It's like for me to really know like conclusively like why this didn't work with Randy and Janice, because everything else seems to me like to be like that they would have empathy for each other's families, getting killed or potentially or whatever. And so that was the one thing I felt like, it didn't stick the landing on like making me understand why they're acting this way.
Yeah, I mean, I again will attempt to justify it a little bit in saying that, like, I was getting a big shame vibe from the two of them towards the end there, like shame on her end that it all went to hell, shame on Randy's end that like his big move to kind of prove his independence and not intelligence, but like ability to make a grown up decision, backfired, in front of his dad, and they just were kind of like running away with their tail between their legs. I mean, yes, you would also think there'd be empathy there, but like I don't know. I don't think Tombstone's gonna be dead.
No.
And if he is, there is no body yet. So, it's more just like let's go back and regroup, and there'll probably be some kind of more meaningful confrontation in a future chapter of this storyline, I would imagine. So,
absolutely. All right. Well, that's it for the main story here. Mark, why don't you tell everybody about our Slack?
Well, hundreds of listeners like you hang out in our community of Spider-Man fans on Slack. The amazing Spider Slack community is absolutely free to join, and you can jump into active conversations with awesome people about collecting, conventions, movies, new comics, old comics, more. I mean, I know people like to just tag me randomly in the Slack to get me to come out of the woodwork like once a week or once a month. So I don't think I saw that before we came on this show, Dan. I don't think anyone's kind of tagged me recently, but what else is going on in the Slack this week?
Yeah, well, I mean, this was kind of a big week for like Marvel news. Friend of the show, Tom Brevoort, made an announcement via his newsletter, which if you're not signed up for Tom Brevoort's newsletter, it's often the highlight of my week, reading him like respond to questions and things like that, and giving real nice behind the scenes, knowledge about like what's going on at Marvel. There's a really nice amount of transparency there, but he was teasing something, and it came out this week that he's moving from Avengers, where he's been for 15 years on Avengers titles.
Yeah. Or longer. I mean, I feel like he goes back to the Bendis New Avengers era, doesn't he?
Yeah, he does. Yeah. So
we're talking like 20 years now.
Yeah, and oversaw some really monumental stories. I mean, Secret Wars and Jonathan Hickman and all that stuff. So he's moving over to the X books now, which are wrapping up their really momentous big story in the Krakoa era. And it's funny because Tom admits, like, I don't really know much about the X-Men. And frankly, that's exciting to me, if only because I feel like that line has become so complicated and confusing that maybe someone who's not from that realm of X-Men can really find a way to invite new readers in. I say new readers. I've been reading every title of X-Men for like 15 years, and I'm no closer to understanding all of it. But anyway, I find that promising, and I find Tom an interesting guy and comics historian and editor, and so that was cool news, and everybody in the Slack was talking about it. And maybe it signals like greater shakeups at Marvel, like, maybe they're going to do a musical chairs of who is taking on what books and things like that. Tom says it's not happening for a while, but anyway, do you have any thoughts about Tom, making that change?
I don't know if I have like hardcore thought. I mean, what I would say without insinuating anything else about our own books is that I feel creatively, not just writers and illustrators, but also editor. I feel like it's good to change things up. Like if I may really vamp about the real world for a second, when I was working for a newspaper, we all got assigned a beat that we covered. It was like our assigned coverage area in terms of a topic, and people, no one was allowed to work a beat for more than like 2 years because they felt like you would basically, as a reporter, get stale doing the same thing and the same kinds of stories over and over again. Like you were encouraged to change it up. And I feel like, obviously we just said, like, it's been almost 20 years that Brevoort's been on the Avengers book. That's a really long time. I mean, like, even if he was, yes, he did some monumental stuff. It was having the time of his life. I think it's good for Brevoort. It's good for Marvel to change that up much sooner than that, frankly. And I could think of maybe a few other editors that have been in their spaces for a really long time that maybe they should be changed up too for the same reasons. So
I mean, like, on that note, like, Avengers as a title has kind of been stagnant since Secret Wars. Like, I know people are enjoying the Jed McKay run. I've not read it yet, but
right.
I feel like it's kind of been all over the place, and nothing has really stuck in the same way it did in his earlier years on the title. So, like you said, shake up is good. And everybody was talking about it in the Slack and about their hopes and dreams for what Marvel can look like when such a major figure gets shuffled around. I mean, like, he's not the editor-in-chief, but only because he doesn't want to be. And so Tom's a big name. So anyway, if you want to join in on the conversation about this topic and many others, come join our amazing Slack. There's a link in the description of this episode that'll let you sign up in less than a minute. Hop on in, say hello, and everybody will welcome you. It's a very fun community.
You got it. All right, Dan, do we want to kind of rifle through the remaining stories and sidebars of this mega book here?
Yeah, let's go through these pretty quickly. There are a lot of mini micro backups, and some I think more effective than others. Starting off with this Miss Marvel one. Boy, Whiplash, she's alive again. It's been a month and a half, and she's back.
Yeah, I mean, oof. I mean, like, putting aside what's in this actual book, I do want to just get out of the way. Like, talk about, like, anticlimactic and kind of a waste of a character death. That's all I'm gonna. I mean, the Marvels movie's not coming out till what, November, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I at least would have thought like October at the and even then when I was looking at the calendar, I was like, wow, they're only gonna like kill her off for like 4 or 5 months. All right. I mean, I guess seems kind of crazy. Like, wow, like that just left a bad taste in my mouth. Even though I knew it was inevitable, it just left a bad taste in my mouth.
Yeah, I'm not really sure like what the culprit is here, in that regard. Like, they're trying to like time up the X books and the Spider-Man books, I think, in this regard. And I think the Spider-Man books got the bad end of the deal. like,
Yeah.
because she reappears in the Hellfire Gala issue, and she's like a major part of that issue, at least for the first half of it, the one that came out just a couple weeks ago. And it seems like it was all timed around that in some way. And it's just like, this whatever this inner office plan was, I don't think really paid off the way that they wanted it to. As for this, I thought it was like cute and touching and added a little bit more of like drama and heart to the events that happened in issue 26. Like, it doesn't redeem it, but like, I thought it was at least well written and touching moment between the two characters. And the whole like, you were a hero, and there's some kind of like retcons like, hey, you shapeshifted because it must have meant a lot to you. Not that we forgot that you couldn't shapeshift as a power. Right. But the thing that really like launched out of this and made big splashy stuff on the internet was this, like, I would consider it a very bad meta joke about the kid who collects Spider-Man, where basically Spider-Man says like he's going to reveal his identity to Miss Marvel, and it's just like, I usually reserve this for kids on their deathbeds,
right?
And
or with terminal diseases or whatever it was. Yeah, it was not great, Bob.
Yeah, and I will say it's like I get the meta joke that like that's a story that happens frequently. Like we just had in the past couple of years in the Zdarsky run and the King run, like two stories back to back almost of like Spider-Man spending time with a terminally ill kid. And I get that that's a trope, but like it does break the universe to have Spider-Man be like make a joke about it, like, because those moments would have meant a lot to him, regardless of whether we as the readers go, again, a terminally ill kid. So I thought not a shining moment in a book that otherwise has great humor.
Yeah, I mean, I could comment on the fact that, and I don't know, did we ask? I'm asking you on our own podcast. Did we ever confirm with Ron? Like, is Kid Who Collects considered like 616 continuity?
I mean, I think Dan Slott made it 616 continuity.
Well, what I was about to say was, like I have a hard time sometimes just seeing that story as being part of the main continuity. Like, not that it like is an Elseworld story or anything like that, but it just feels like it's just this own. It's a writing exercise by Stern that is beautifully rendered by Ron Frenz, and it's a wonderful story in that regard, but like I don't feel, and it says so much about Spider-Man. It doesn't, it doesn't need to be part of the same universe where he's fighting Doc Ock and Norman Osborn. That's the bottom line for me. So like, it just kind of really, really doubled down the awfulness of a joke that like. And yes, I know that Tim Harrison shows up and was it 700 or one of the one of the many floating guilty heads of shame and for Spider-Man stories that Dan Slott did. But yeah, it was just a poor joke. I mean, like, I got to be honest. I know you found some positives to this one story. I really did not care for it. It's just like, again, just the very sudden reappearance of Kamala here is just very off-putting. This it's like we're gonna smile and be happy now, and it was just like we just came off of a story that is still quite fresh, where like this character was involved. This character was involved in one of Spider-Man's darkest moments. And then her death was like kind of like added to the darkness of it, and this was just like I don't know, just this felt like a smilectomy to me in terms of like like no, we're all good, and I'm going back to the X-Men, and it's just like this is weird. I found some of the follow-ups to this to be far more entertaining, and we'll get to that in a second, but like this kind of like, again, I was grooving on the first main story, and then this kind of took me out of it, and then it took the other stories to kind of get me back on board on this comic. So, I guess I won't defend the
the macro choice. You know, like I think in isolation, I was like, okay, at least we're going to acknowledge this and have a nice moment between the two of them. And I do think it's good that they know each other's identities.
Sure.
You know, like they are a pair that I think fits really well together. If there wasn't a Miles Morales who they're kind of doing nothing with in regards to Peter, like I do think like having Kamala be mentored by Peter in some way has a lot of potential, and maybe knowing each other's identities will set some of those stories up. I'm not going to like it is a really bad move on a macro level to do this to this character, but I was at least like, okay, at least this felt more honest to me than Peter's like mourning her with a mask in his hand at in issue 27.
Sure.
So yeah.
Sure. If that's your standard,
okay.
let's.
I'm going to say it is, Mark. That is my standard.
That bar is like subterranean. That you just set there.
Sure.
So let's talk about Doc Ock and his appearance here, which is a teaser for Superior Spider-Man. I mean, look. I mean, your mileage may vary if you want to see Dan Slott writing Superior Spider-Man again. It is only going to be a one issue. Like. We just got what ended up being a really entertaining Doc Ock storyline that while it teased the fact that he was still searching his memories, like the fact that he was once Superior didn't really, I feel like, affect the outcome of the book as much, or at least his characterization as much. This is just going to lean right into it. He's figured it out, what's going on. I don't know. What are your thoughts here, Dan?
Well, I'll correct you. It's not just one issue. Like, we're getting that one shot, but then the Spider-Man comic is being canceled and replaced with Superior Spider-Man as an ongoing. So, like, I'm just not excited about that. I don't know, man. Like, this was fine, but, like, the whole ultimate equation that he's searching for, to me, just, like, reeks of Secret Scrolls. You know, like, it's some weird... We've never heard of it before. MacGuffin. I don't know. Like I'm gonna need a little bit more if I'm ready to like return to Superior after 10 years. You know, like I just this did not convince me that they have a really like cool story idea for why they're revisiting Superior. I'm gonna need more. So I don't know. Like maybe I'm just cool on Dan Slott's work. You know, I don't see an idea here yet other than like, remember Superior? That was cool. And that's just not enough for me in 2023.
Gotcha. Well, in terms of things that we all universally love and adore in every corner of Spider-Man fandom, we got this next story with Mary Jane and Paul, which was to tease the debut of Jackpot. MJ, I think the big takeaway here more than anything else is that MJ and Paul share a bed. People got to just, it's a sad day, Dan. I don't know what else to say than that they share a bed.
Well, I am glad that we at least are seeing, some fallout from, the death of the kid, so to speak. Right. I'll just say it. I don't like this direction for the character. Like, I don't know why we needed to put her through losing children. And like here it really nails it down. It's like, no, she's like allowing herself to grieve the death of two real people. And it's like, I don't know why that was the story we needed to tell with MJ. I guess the idea is that it's going to fuel her to become a superhero and be a part of her origin story. But if that's the case, I don't think that was earned either. That being said, I do think the writing in this is good. Celeste Bronfman, who made her her first writing appearance in the world of Spider-Man in the annual. She did the backup story with
Anna Watson.
Right. Anna Watson kind of like going crazy after the drugs from the Hellfire Gala were flipped. Anyway, it's a whole thing with X-Men. I thought she did that story really well, and to see her do this, like, I hope she's getting to write. I guess there's going to be a Jackpot book. I don't know. I would imagine so. And maybe they're trying out this writer. I think she's got a real flair for like writing these characters in as unusual of a circumstance as they are in. So I can't say this was like entertaining. It was mostly really dour and upsetting. But I was happy to see some follow up on a character I really care about.
Got it. Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, like you said, I mean, like, it's good to get, I wouldn't call it closure, but acknowledgement. This whole thing is just strange to me, and that's not even like coming from the MJ and Paul of it all. I mean, like, not to sound like certain segments of fans, but like, I feel like with every passing issue or day, like it's kind of like taking the original premise and conceit of this storyline and kind of just turning it into, well, no, MJ just kind of found another guy. That's the drama. You know what I mean? Like it's not quite as star-crossed as I think it was originally setting up to be.
Well, Paul is a non-entity. Like,
right.
If he says anything here, like, I can't remember it, like,
right.
And yeah, what are we doing with this character? Is he just going to exist? Like, why are we doing all this to MJ? I still don't understand.
Right. Yes. It definitely seems like we are walking her through trials and tribulations for what exact payoff we don't know.
I mean, jackpot is probably the payoff.
Yeah. Which, I mean, we'll see how long that lasts, and frankly, I hope it doesn't last long. I mean, like, it could be fun for a couple of issues or a mini or whatever, but like the fact of the matter is, like, I forget who was saying this and when, but we're like looking at like this supporting cast of Spider-Mans right now, and it's like, who doesn't have powers? And it's just a little weird right now. Like, can we stop? Can we just have some normies in this? And I don't mean Normie Osborn, because he's got powers too. Anyway.
I did like the Black Cat like friendship with MJ, which has been something that they've kind of slowly established.
Sure.
Again, something that I think worked best in a one shot and not in an ongoing or mini series. And I thought that the final reveal image of Jackpot was really lackluster, especially given like the artwork that we've seen from Humberto Ramos designing the character. Like, that suit looked really cool, and here it's like, oh, that's really ugly. Like, that's what we're going with for the reveal of this character.
Right. So just to move on to am I good to move on to the next story?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, so we got a tease for a new Spider-Woman series. I got to admit, I was not a huge fan of the last Spider-Woman ongoing. I really want to get back to those Dennis Hopeless era stories. I thought that was some of the best the character, Jessica Drew has been. I guess the one glimmer of hope here is it seems like her reuniting with her child is going to be the focus, although there still seems to be a bit of an edge and a darkness there. But like, I don't know. I was a little hopeful for this. Did you get any hope from it whatsoever?
Yeah, I don't know that we need another dark Spider-Woman series after the last one, which like I found, kind of hopeless and kind of incomprehensible, like all of the mechanics of it. I like read it all the way through and was just like, I don't know that I understand what this is about. If there's a really straight through line here of her trying to find her kid and there's some implications of Hydra, cool, that's a good place for Spider-Woman to exist. And maybe the Hopeless Run just exists on its own weird thing, as wonderful as it was. But I did get some hope here. Like, I think, first of all, Borelli on the art, I think it's beautiful. Like, these are really attractive looking pages. This is an artist that just came out of nowhere for me, and I want to see doing a lot more. This was great, and the fact that like they foreground Captain Marvel's relationship with Spider-Woman is always a good thing. I think it's one of the best friendships in like modern Marvel comics, and so like I'll read anything that's about like Captain Marvel and Spider-Woman hanging out.
Okay. So There's a part of me for the next story. I kind of just want to get like a bucket of popcorn and watch you cook right now, because like the next is the tease for the Spider Boy miniseries, Spider Boy, which is the we all chanted and somebody listened. I don't know who chanted and I don't know who's listening, but this is Dan Slott's prized creation on his adjectiveless Spider-Man series, which I gotta be honest, has not been my jam. This is why I know it's not your jam, Dan. That's part of the reason why we just don't talk about it on this book. You alluded to it earlier with the Superior Spider-Man. Like, what is? I mean, Dan Slott is just all over this line right now. Dan Slott, who essentially retired from Spider-Man like 5 years ago, and after his big historic run, he's back doing these sidebar stories, which seem to have no tethering to anything significant, yet seem to be getting the hype and adulation that you would expect out of like the main book. I found the story incomprehensible, maybe because I just don't have any interest in the deep cuts of Marvel about like people who create human human like animals. I don't know what here, popcorn bucket, go, Dan.
I mean, it's the Stillwells, right? And we haven't really encountered these two brothers in quite some time. They created the Fly and the Scorpion. So there is a tie back to early Spider-Man stuff, right? And we're meeting their mother for the first time and learning that like, oh, it wasn't just a fluke that these two brothers were interested in human animal hybrid people, and there's implications here. It reminded me actually of like Ezekiel talking about the totems. Like, it's weird that all of your enemies are animal themed, and here there's an implication. Oh no, this reaches far deeper. Like Rhino was trying to do what the Stillwells wanted, and I don't know. I mean, like, create a list of things that don't get me excited about a character, and it's like human animal hybrids. As much as we beat up on the high evolutionary on our podcast, like, but then you get like this really, I hate to use the word masturbatory, but we're gonna do it. I'm gonna do it just because like I didn't need to return to Regent and find out that one of Regent's aides was a Stillwell. Like, I don't need to mine more obscure Spider-Man history, and retcon larger implied things in the same way that he did Spider-Verse. I guess that the core of it is like I don't get what I see as like overhyped, manufactured hype around Spider-Boy, and I'll admit, when Dan Slott said order this comic, I did. Like, I ordered the variant cover introducing Spider-Boy. Like, I was like, okay, like Dan Slott has not really like steered me wrong when he says like I'm going to introduce something that's going to disrupt Spider-Man for good or ill. I don't think he's ever like really not delivered on a promise, whether I've liked them or not, And I liked the Edge of Spider-Verse Spider-Boy story just fine. It was cute, and I don't ever need to see that character again. I don't get what the draw is to this character. It's this prolonged mystery, and it's like, just get to it. Like, and maybe this is the closest we've gotten. Like, oh, he's half spider, half boy, which was my joking suggestion on Twitter to Dan Slott that, this was the spider that bit Peter Parker turned into a boy because it bit Peter Parker. And that's probably not true, right? But yeah, eat my shoe. Yeah.
Oh,
Dan has been saying like, I'll come on your show and watch you eat a shoe,
Right.
But either way, like people are buying this up, great, and it's going to get its own series. I just don't get it. And this does not move me further in that direction. Like, Paco Medina's art was beautiful, like cool human animal hybrid things. But like, this is another one of those, like, I'm Dan Slott and I'm going to really lean into my own stuff. so heavily, and I'm just like, I'm so disconnected from that. Like, I'm ready for him to move on from Spider-Man, and instead I feel like we're just digging deeper trenches. So.
Okay, well done. I got nothing further to add.
Is Spider-Boy working for you, Mark?
No,
like, are you,
no,
yeah.
I don't care. I don't care at all. I don't care at all. I am almost ashamed to admit. So I did not buy any of the variants for Spider-Boy. I was, clearly. Yeah, I mean, you're on Twitter far more than I am, especially. I mean, even back then, you were on far more than I am.
I'm part of the problem. Is really what I'm admitting. But
I mean,
ahead.
whatever. I've deleted it from my phone, folks, and have it looked back. That's all I'm gonna say. It's been life affirming. The fact of the matter is, I will buy this miniseries because it's like, well, maybe I'll start to understand it, or like, hey, I'll buy it, and 10 years from now, it's gonna be like the number one book on, like, what is it, like the comic list, top list, or something like that. I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, that's my standard now. It's like, oh well, like, I'll buy it on the in my pull box now, and it'll be worth $50 in 5 years. That's like kind of where I'm at with it. Like, that is my level of giving a what about it. So
well, that's what it is. To me, this feels like the worst like behaviors of the 90s, which is like artificially hyping something and then not delivering on it, and ultimately it's forgotten within a couple of weeks.
Yeah, but the fact of the matter is, like, the difference here is, like, in the 90s when they did that, they produced 1 million copies of it. This is still like what, going to touch like 80,000 copies or something. I mean,
maybe, yeah, if it's lucky. Yeah. I just like look at this idea, and it's like, okay, like Miles Morales, the appeal of that character is obvious to me from the start. It's like, and still very few people bought Ultimate Fallout, and now that book is worth a crazy amount of money. But that character had something really going for it. Like, I don't see, given the kind of, like, we got touches to Regent and like the Stillwells, like the obscurity of this to me, like, seems like it's already a plateau for how much of a game changer this character could be for the Marvel Universe.
I mean, in addition to this being, and I know you don't like using it, but I don't have a problem using it. In addition to this being like typical Slott masturbatory stuff, like I would also just like be remiss in mentioning like Regent and human animals and stuff like that, and like the retconning, like early origin type stuff. Like, these are like my least favorite isms of Dan Slott, if you will. You know what I mean? Like I am far more intrigued by Superior Spider-Man, because at least I find that to be a high point of his work than anything coming here. That's
how I felt about his new Spider-Man run. It's like indulging in all of the behaviors I like the least from Dan Slott. And
correct.
And I know when I talked to him for the show, he was lamenting the like bi-monthly schedule of Amazing Spider-Man. He's like, finally, with my Spider-Man book, I get a monthly book. Although now he's taking on 2 books again. But he's like, I got a monthly book, and I can really like put the work in, and really focus on that. And I think it's behaving the same way as all the stuff we didn't like about his Volume 3 and some of Volume 4. So like, I think he just writes these books this way, and it just doesn't work for us. I know he has very many fans, so
right. All right. Well, we're taking longer than we said we would, Dan. Let's rifle through certainly these next 2 stories, because they're inoffensively short. We got something about a person named Perry Thomas, who basically is like obsessed with being saved by superheroes. Fun read. Got some good Human Torch, Spider-Man interplay. Like, sure, we could do another short about this guy. He's rec rap level, right?
I really liked this story. I thought it was just like fun and light. The image of him looking at Daredevil's like running away at the very end with that look in his eye was like, I was like, great. Like that image sold me on the whole thing. Like, cool. I liked this. This is exactly the kind of backup thing that is fun. and a unique idea that I don't even know that I need to revisit, but I would read a one-shot about this guy.
Sure.
This is a fun look at the Marvel Universe.
Then we got a story named Loosey Goosey, which was about, as the name implies, geese. Cute, very inventory-ish, nice art. Any further thoughts to it?
It was dumb. It was cute. And if you've played Untitled Goose Game, I feel like that's where this spawned from. It's just like geese are agents of chaos, and why don't we inject a goose into the world of Spider-Man? I don't know where that creative spark comes from, but, it was fun enough to read.
Sure. So then the penultimate story in this one, we got a tease for the Spider-Man Last Hunt arc that's coming, and this was Patrick Gleason on art, right?
Yeah.
So Gleason, everything, he can draw the phone book for me, and I'd be into it. But was there anything besides the art? Anything you found interesting here?
I kind of found this a bit incomprehensible to read. Maybe it's just me, but like I felt like we entered into a story like a page or two late. Like Queen Goblin is chasing Kraven, but he's talking about how he's hunting her, and then they make love. I was like, what? Do these characters have a history with each other that I wasn't really aware of? It was fine. Like, I love the details of like the claws on Kraven's back from like the post-coital scratching and stuff like that. That was like an amusing visual, I guess. As weird as it is that Ashley Kafka's body is being made to do these things, like, I don't know. I'm not going to take like a high-minded take to say like this is sexual assault or whatever, but then there's this whole idea of like the totems reborn. I didn't know what that was about, but it seems like it's Spider-Man becoming the Green Goblin and inheriting Norman's sins. That's the image that so maybe that's the premise of Spidey's Last Hunt, is that he's gonna go evil or whatever. We'll see. But as a 2-pager, I was like, I don't really know what to make of this. It more than like it didn't really hype me more than it confused me. Am I alone?
I didn't know what to. You sounds like you got even more out of it than I did. I just was kind of caught up in the ew. What is happening with Kraven and Queen Goblin? I don't want to see this. Like, it was just like, yeah. I'm not trying to be a prude, people, but it was just like, I don't need this. What is this story?
Well, it felt like a weird fever dream of like loose, disconnected images.
Yes.
And I don't know. That stuff
it tracks with the characters, but I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, I also just like would like to continually remind people that Queen Goblin is Ashley Kafka, which is like, you know what I mean? Like, I just mean like it's like people are gonna think I'm like some kind of like Puritan here, Dan. But like, I'm just like, I don't think when I think of sexualization, I don't think of Ashley Kafka. That's all I gotta say. I mean, And then finally, speaking of sexualization, radioactive sexualization and its after effects, we got the teaser for Spider-Man Reign 2. Lord have mercy on our souls, as I said earlier. I mean, like, Dan, for the uninitiated, which I can't imagine if you're listening to this on Patreon, you're one of them, but this is one of, would you describe it as one of your favorite, or is it just that you enjoy it and I discernibly do not?
I don't know that it's a favorite. I would put it in my top like 50 Spider-Man stories or something like that. I really like it. I think it's a really interesting, it's like one of my favorite Elseworld what if Spider-Man stories. It feels like a coherent thought to me, and that is something I like about it.
Well, I do want to mention, Dan, because I don't, and I'm not trying to promote myself on social media here, but if you've been going to my Instagram feed lately, I've been kind of doing in my stories like little look backs to either old podcasts or blog posts, and 9 years ago, on the night that we are recording this on August 14th, Dan, we did a review of Amazing Spider-Man Spiral 20.1, and in the B section, I believe the hatred for Rain first came out.
Yes.
For me. So we are 9 years to the day of Mark revealing that I do not like this story, the original Spider-Man Reign, and we don't have to get into it here. But with that said, I mean, like, the art is certainly, Kaare Andrews' art is certainly super compelling here. I mean, like, I just don't know what story is left to tell here, but it's happening apparently. So there you go.
Yeah, I don't know what the story is either. I'm intrigued, like, that they, enough that they would get him back to do it again. It's funny because I found a tweet that I made of me just like begging for a Rain 2, and I'm like, oh cool, it happened. Like, this was a real surprise for me. Like, I kind of like was happy to see Andrews get brought back into the fold recently, because I think he's a very talented artist. His style might not be for everybody, but he's kind of been doing some more Marvel stuff over the past few years. He did a book called Amazing Fantasy, which I didn't like very much, I will admit.
Right.
But I like the art a lot and some of the ideas in it. So whether this will be a home run, like, I felt like Rain really tied a bow on things. But this was really, I brought a smile to my face because I like the story so much. But it did feel like a weird, like, appendix to this otherwise fairly coherent issue. So
Got it. Sure. Do we want to grade this whole mammoth thing, Dan?
sure, yeah. I mean, it's
You want me
tough
to
because
start?
it's such a variety. Yeah, go ahead. What are you gonna give it?
Well, I would say I'm gonna do it like this, Dan. So the main story for me is a B plus. I think all of the ancillary stuff is like a C minus for me. So I'm gonna not gonna average them together per se, because I think it's heavily weighted towards the main story. So I'm gonna give overall a B.
I think that's good. I think I'm really hot on the main story. Like, I think it's like A minus territory. The only thing that keeps me out of that is like the repetition of the issue 583. Like, just that I've seen that story before. So like, I think I'm in like the A minus B plus territory with you. And again, I agree, C minus C for the backups. Which is, in terms of backups, I think is pretty high. Like, normally I would
Yeah,
give backups like D minuses, like,
sure. Oh, of course. Yeah.
yeah. So like this I feel like is the first $10 book that I got my money's worth from. So yeah, I think I'm going to give it a B as well.
Excellent. Well, on that note, Dan, it's that time for all good things to come to an end. So we want to say thank you to you, the listeners and viewers, for tuning in to this episode of The Amazing Spider Talk.
Yeah, this podcast exists because of listener support on Patreon. For only $3.99 a month, you can help support our show's existence while getting early episodes, including these reviews the same weeks the comics release, exclusive artwork, and a ton of other bonuses. Thank you again to everybody who already supports us and the work that we do, but we wanted to issue a special thank you and welcome our newest patron, Scott. But I wanted to add another note to this, which is Patreon decided for some reason that they were going to change how they charge people's credit cards. And they moved it to like Ireland or something like that, just so that they could like maybe save money. And it caused a big problem on the Patreon that made us lose about 20% of our patrons. So if you're someone that at one point was a patron and found it canceled on you, come back and join us. We would love to have you back. It was a technical error on Patreon's behalf. Help us spread the word about what went wrong at Patreon and getting people back into the fold.
Yeah, actually, one of the Patreons that I subscribe to, I got. Yeah, so it's real, folks. It's not.
Yeah.
We're not just saying that to cover our numbers for all you internet conspiracy theorists. To download our earliest episodes, including interviews with legendary creators like Jan DeMatteis, Tom DeFalco, Ron Frenz, Mark Bagley, David Michelini, and many more, subscribe to our Amazing Spider Talk Back Issues podcast on Apple Podcasts.
So, Mark, Now that we've successfully avoided talking about what really happened during my bachelor party, enough to throw our wives off the scent, what's our motto?
I mean, is it like with great podcasts come the meat sweats? Because that's what I remember about your bachelor
Yeah,
party.
I do remember that too, yeah.
With great podcasts, there must also come the amazing spider talk.